Well, I don't know exactly how John and I got together. It was like Kathy was saying, it was just sort of this cloud. I think I met John through either Skip or Lee, and it was just sort of part of the market cloud of people that just is there. It's always changing, but it's always there. I was lucky enough to be associated with Lee Lockhart and Sebi Nachmias at the Read All About It newsstand at First and Pike. Sebi had been selling papers on that corner since the Second World War, and Lee was a craft person in the market, and he convinced Sebi to open a stand that would sell magazines as well as newspapers. And they got the permission from the market to open in 1979, and then in February of 1980, I asked for a job, and they gave it to me, but they didn't have enough money to actually pay me. So I gave them each $500 and became a partner at that time. Yeah, it worked out. It worked out. At that time, the market had been officially saved. It was already officially historic, but it was continually being torn down and patched up, and decisions being made as to what businesses could go where. As you may know, the PDA, the Preservation and Development Authority, manages the market on a day-to-day basis, but there's a historical commission that decides what color your signs can be and whether your business can go there and whether you can have fluorescent lights or incandescent lights. And there were endless discussions on these kinds of details. The main problem, though, was the historic farmers market had been saved, but there weren't any historic farmers, or certainly not enough to populate it. When we opened the newsstand in 1980, the whole Economy Row there was beautiful galvanized tables, but they were all empty. So little by little, well, and not too long after that, we tried to expand the 8-foot newsstand to a 16-foot newsstand, and my goodness, we spent months going before committees and promising that we wouldn't violate the farmers market code, whatever that was. And eventually the newsstand opened, and then craftspeople were allowed to use the tables, but grudgingly, because we don't want craftspeople on the farmers' tables, except we kind of did. They did a pretty good job. People enjoyed their stuff, and gradually they got to become permanent. I mean, so they could actually open storefronts, but with all sorts of provisos of it. It can't be too permanent, it can't be too big, it can't be too glossy, but there you have it. That's to me, the way the market, I suppose it's still evolving, but it's very tortured logic sometimes. I served on the PDA for 4 years about that time, right before John's book came out, and it seemed like several meetings a year. Whatever decision we were thinking about, if we went the wrong way, that was going to be the end of the market. At least a percentage of the people in the room were convinced at that time. So I think the jury is still out on the effect of those decisions. But one thing I think they've kept is the owner-operator element of the market. What I've enjoyed most about it, and I think what John really related to, is everything that happens in the market is happening in front of you. Most of our businesses and most of the people that we know and see on the street, they're doing something in an office or on a boat or in a field or somewhere that we've never seen what they do. We can imagine, but in the market, it's a table or a sidewalk in the morning, and then in the later morning, it's a store and they're selling things and you're buying things, and then at 8 o'clock at night, it's a table again. There's something very appealing. Maybe I'm just simple-minded, but I love that interaction and that exchange that the market provides. You literally have to interact with somebody to buy something. You can't do it any other way. You can be rude, you can be an idiot, you can be any way you want, but you have to interact. And inevitably, there's so much knowledge that passes about buying a cut of meat or a piece of produce or a craft that somebody's produced, that eventually the vendor-buyer relationship turns into a discussion about your family and what did you do before this, and isn't this crazy weather we're having, and inevitably it turns into this cloud of humanity. I guess I don't have a better image than that, but John really related that and was absolutely part of that. It was so luxurious to have a place where you could just come and this stuff would happen. You didn't have to make an appointment. Somebody didn't have to meet you at a particular time. It just went on. We at the newsstand had a particularly good time at being in the middle of that cloud. I'm going to sound like I'm rhapsodizing about the days of horse-drawn carriages and things like that. But in the pre-internet days at the newsstand, we made an arrangement with Greyhound and these papers all over the country where they would put a bundle of their Sunday paper on the Greyhound with "Read All About It Seattle" on the label, and they'd throw it on a Greyhound. And it would get here unless there wasn't enough room. If a passenger suitcase needed to go, they came off the bus at that terminal, and then the next bus going to Seattle, they put them back on. And we had a guy that would go down to the Greyhound every night and just see whatever had "Read All About It" on it, and it would wind up at the newsstand. And I think most of you can really, people were just thrilled that they would get news from Miami, and it was only 3 days late. It was breathtaking. People really did use it. It was more than just nostalgia and sports scores, though. We had a lot of merchants businesses that would buy it. I mean, how else would you find out what people were selling carpets for in Kansas City? And if my wife got a job in San Diego, what kind of job was there for me, and how much are apartments? And we had one guy that was trying to figure out whether it was worthwhile taking his yacht through the Panama Canal to sell it in Florida rather than on the West Coast. And he stacked up with the papers to answer that question. And then we also had the advantage, early in the 80s, there was a broker in, I think he was in Tennessee, of all places. But he brought in a big shipment of European publications and would break them up, and we were able to take advantage of that. One morning in the 80s, when Queen Elizabeth's yacht was in Elliott Bay, we had a big black car with Union Jacks on the fluttering from the fenders, and a guy in a suit came out and loaded up on everything for a very special customer, we were assured. We got Russian papers and magazines from the Soviet consulate in San Francisco when the Goodwill Games happened in the 80s between U.S. and the Soviet Union. A reporter from Pravda came out and took pictures of us at the stand, and then about 3 weeks later, we were selling that paper with our picture and the article. So it was kind of a kick. And there were all kinds of movies that would set up, in the market, Sleepless in Seattle and The Baker Boys, Singles shot here. And they were all over the newsstand. They were taking pictures, and they wanted all the details. And then they built one in a studio that said Pike Place News. We got no credit whatsoever. Even without these famous representations of the market, it was such an international place, and I think still is. I guess I haven't been a partner in the newsstand for 15 years now, so I'm certainly no authority. But even then, there are just people from all over the world. As I enjoyed dealing with Charlot, who sold fish at Pike Place Fish Market, and after a while and talking, you find out that he grew up in Salonika, and then the number on his arm that he got from Birkenwald. And he was married to Blanche, who worked at De La Rennie's. Wonderful woman, very nice, a little bit of a French accent. She grew up in the Belgian Congo, and they met and married in a refugee camp in Europe. And it's like, oh yeah, of course. I mean, all of this stuff is going on, which you would never know if you didn't have the time to buy a pound of fish 3 times a week, for years, or get your spaghetti or coffee or whatever you get into De La Rennie's. One of my favorite stories on that line is Don Cuzzaro Sr. had served in World War II before he opened Don and Joe's Meats with his brother-in-law. And Pete Hanada's family had been growing produce in the market for generations before their family had been sent to a concentration camp during World War II. Well, they came back and were able to open a produce stand right across the aisle from Don Cuzzaro. And about 17 years later, Don Jr. wound up marrying Pete's niece, who helped her uncle across the way. And Diana's still doing the books for Don and Joe's Meats. It's also a gathering place who remember an even earlier time. I mean, I still can't get over the fact that we published this book 30 years ago. It's impossible. And I mean, the market seemed like it had so much history when I first came to it. And of course it's historical, but it seems so immediate. I suppose that's part of what being old is that you remember things from a long time ago, and they don't seem that long ago. We had a lot of the people who lived in the single occupancy rooms that used to be more common on First Avenue. The market's preserved some of them, but we had miners and construction workers, worked on the dams and the forests of the Northwest. We had longshoremen who had showed up every morning. The hiring hall was just down on Western Avenue, and before the container ships took over in the late 60s, these guys would show up every morning to unload cement and bananas, and they're still around. Another merchant seaman friend talked about hitting port with his sea bag, taking his sea bag and his paycheck to Mom Avery's Shellback Tavern, which is right about where the Lusty Lady is, and that sea bag would go downstairs and the check would go in her safe, and he could eat and drink as long as that held out, and then she'd tell him it was time to go back to sea, and he did. It's, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's hard to put it in perspective. I'm certainly the gentrification that Kathy was talking about seems to be picking up speed. It's just breathtaking, but somehow, to me, the market still has that patina of interaction that it also includes, you know, literally millions of tourists from all over the world. I remember sitting in the Little Saigon Cafe in the 90s, and there was hearing a guy with a loud voice and a really high-pitched laugh over on the other wall. I think I was even with Turnbull at that time, but he told me that was Jeff Bezos, who they had an office right across the street, across the street from First Avenue, up by Virginia, and they were going to sell books through your computer. You know, that can't possibly work. And then there was that guy, Howard Schultz, who bought the Starbucks roasting company, and he opened a little espresso bar called Il Giornale. But I mean, come on, there was so much espresso already. That wasn't going to go anywhere, right? So you could see how prescient I am on the future. I got it. And I probably betrayed that same frame of mind when I came to the conclusion in 2001 that newsstands really couldn't exist in the digital age. I had opened 2 other newsstands on Capitol Hill and in Fremont, and sold those to a couple that, as far as I can tell, did everything right, did a wonderful job, but they were out of business in 5 years. I sold my interest in First and Pike to my partner, Lee, at the same time. And if you go to the bottom of the stairs and turn right, you'll still see a newsstand that's humming along, and Lee continues to pay his employees more than minimum wage and cover their health care. So once again, my powers of prediction are unimpaired. There were 6 butchers in the area when Don Cuzzaro first started working with his dad, and I'm sure there are all kinds of sound business reasons why running a butcher shop in the market is impossible. But Don is still doing it. He says a lot of his customers don't understand why they can't order online, but they can't, and they never will. But he thinks he'll be able to pass it on to one of the guys who's working with him now, and I have every reason to believe he will. I don't know, there's something about the market that you've got to keep your eye on the bottom line. You've got to be a good person. You've got to be paying attention. But it's obviously something more that keeps people here and keeps people wanting to come down here. And John absolutely shared that and nailed that, I think, in the book. We're all beneficiaries, and I hope we can continue to enjoy and contribute with our dollars and our sensibilities. So thanks very much.